on this episode of The Strange Medicine of Alice Strange.
And then she started on with the medications. Like, well, you should take some anti-anxiety meds or even antidepressants because that will help you get through the day. But I already saw myself as a failure for leaving my teaching career after 6 years. So I felt like if I had to take a pill to get through the day, then that would be an epic fail too.
Once you learn to love yourself, it's kind of like you love people in a way you didn't even know you could.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful place to reach. And also like totally possible. Like totally possible to love somebody and allow that, not get dependent on it, not over attached, but allow that to help you to learn to love yourself. I think it's such an awful toxic phrase that people say with the you can't love others until you love yourself.
Yeah, and I think you actually can love other people even if you don't love yourself in the moment, because I think those, when you love other people, it's almost like it's giving you that external validation. It shows you that someone is willing to let you in to love them. So if someone's willing to let you in, then that means you are lovable. So it's like almost like it feeds the soul too, as long as it's not in a codependent or unhealthy way.
As coaches, that's one of the things we do a lot is okay, I'll tell you you're good enough, but eventually you have to take that yourself, and you have to be able to, it's kind of the energy of, I'll show you the path, but I'm not going to hold your hand and drag you the whole way. Whereas
That's right.
Therapy is going to put you in a cart and lug you down that path.
Even if you're kicking and screaming.
Welcome, seekers, to The Strange Medicine of Alice Strange, the podcast where modern science meets with what lies beyond what we can see. Here, we delve into psychology, spirituality, science, and the occult. Each episode will explore the bigger questions of existence, the nature of the soul, our internal world, and how we can understand them through spirituality and magic. This podcast is a sanctuary for the soul. Alongside science and spirituality, we also learn the power of compassion and the magic of extending kindness to others. For in the act of giving, we receive. In the act of teaching, we learn. This is a journey into the depths of the mind as well as the heart, where every lesson is a step toward oneness, every insight a bridge to understanding, and every act of kindness a spell that transforms the world. So join me, Alice Autumn Strange, on this journey of self-discovery, scientific wonders, ancient knowledge, and finding the strange medicine within yourself. Hello, seekers and healers. I am Alice Autumn Strange, and today we are talking to Kim Keane. Kim Keane is a certified life coach, Reiki master, sound healer, integrative energy therapy master instructor, and EFT tapping practitioner, along with being a podcaster. She has addressed community organizations, schools and colleges, such as Boys and Girls Club and Purdue University, as well as women's groups such as the Polka Dot Powerhouse and Moms Who Dare. She strives to empower women to embrace who they are so they can be and do all that they aspire to be, and leave a legacy that is better than what was left for them. This interview is a great conversation between two coaches dedicated to helping you become your best self. We talk about her beautiful life story of healing and self-development. We talk about the weight of labels, of self-help books, how to use affirmations, being obsessive about your healing, overcoming codependency, coaches versus therapists, living in the present, resisting change, and overcoming your behavioral patterns. And I will be appearing on Kim's podcast as well, so keep an eye out for that. I will be posting about when it goes live. We had such a beautiful conversation that I think many people will find healing in. And if you don't know me, I'm Alice, and I assist others in becoming the self they desire to be through combining spirituality and psychology. I'm currently taking on a few one-on-one coaching clients for psychic development or self-development, so if you'd like to schedule a consultation, the link will be in the description. And if you're on a budget, I have a Patreon community for developing your psychic abilities with a few membership spots available. We meet weekly in a group setting to work hands-on to grow our abilities and expand our consciousness. I have a video posted with some clips from one of our meetings if you'd like a sneak peek into what it is we do. If you're catching this on YouTube, there will be a link up here. If not, you can go check it out in the YouTube. I'll put that link in the description as well. And if you're looking for healing with spirituality and alternative methods, my community for self-development will be launching soon, where I will be hosting group meetings to overcome dark times with community and compassion. And if you like spirituality, psychology, self-development, and learning, follow my channel or send me a message. We can talk. Take care, love yourself, and remember, you don't have to do it alone. Hello, Kim. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful, wonderful. So I would just, first of all, thank you so much for coming. Would you want to share with everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. I was super excited when you said, yes, let's do it. So my name is Kim, and I wear many hats. So I have the mom hat that I wear, and I have two daughters that are almost 15 and 12. And then I have the fur mom hat, and we have two dogs and a cat. And I have a husband. We've been married almost 16 years. We started dating when we were in our early 20s. So like those are some of the hats. But then the other hats that I have are a life coach and holistic healer. And those hats have come from my own journey with healing and wanting to help others do the same.
I love that. I love that. I think a lot of us healers out here are really just doing things that we've done for ourselves and making
Yes,
sure no one else has to do it alone.
that's
Um,
right.
it's such a beautiful sentiment, and I'm all for it. And I just love your story. I've
Oh,
read
thank
about,
you.
I've looked into, and I would love if you could just share some about where you've been and how you got here.
Yes. So it started in childhood, but I didn't really know that until I left my teaching career. So I left my teaching career in 2014 from teacher burnout. And that was a really hard pill to swallow because I thought that I would teach until I was in my 90s. And they'd be like, look, wrinkly old lady, get out before you die in front of the kids or before you break a hip. And so saying that out loud now, I'm like, wow, Kim, that sounds really naive of you. But that was what I thought. And that was the story I was telling myself. And then when I burnt out after 6.5 years, I didn't leave willingly. My husband basically said, you're not going back because you're miserable and no one wants to be around you. And I was, unhappy at the end of the school day because I was exhausted and his work schedule was crazy. So I was basically like a single mom, even though I was married. And so by November of 2014, I started having some really unhealthy thoughts about life. I was like either willing to end it or I was going to run away. But I didn't want either of those legacies to be the legacy for myself or for my kids. So I thought, okay, perhaps I should go to therapy. And my husband was like, thank God, I thought you were never going to do it. So I went to therapy again, kind of naive, thinking she was going to say, don't worry, Kim, you're just having an identity crisis. And here are the 3 easy ways to fix it. And so it was the farthest thing from that, really. So I started therapy, and the first label was, oh, you're codependent. And I didn't know what that word was. I had never heard that word. But I went home and I Googled it, and I could check yes to all the things on the checklist. And then that became my whole identity. It was like, oh, I'm codependent. And so, well, I do this because I'm codependent, or I do that because I'm codependent, or I'm mad about this, or I don't like that. And it was just my whole world then became being codependent. And so I was doing like reading books about codependency and really trying to manage it. And the therapist was like, oh, you should carry invisible scissors in your pocket or invisible cooking spray so you can cut the cord, cut the strings of codependency, or just better yet, spray yourself with cooking spray and then the codependency will just slide right off. And I was like, well, that's great if you're aware enough to recognize that you're being codependent. I didn't have that awareness yet. So that
Right.
really, those strategies weren't working. So then the next label was anxiety. Do you consider yourself to be an anxious person? I never had, but once she said it, I was like, okay, I can see it. And then she started on with the medications. Like, well, you should take some anti-anxiety meds or even antidepressants because that will help you get through the day. But I already saw myself as a failure for leaving my teaching career after 6 years. So I felt like if I had to take a pill to get through the day, then that would be an epic fail too. And so I couldn't allow myself to take the medication. And so then the next level was childhood emotional neglect. Do you know that you suffer from childhood emotional neglect? Well, yep, it makes sense. And then throw in there that I'm also a domestic violence survivor from my high school boyfriend. So lots of trauma, and it all kind of came bubbling to the surface because she was like basically picking scabs that had been healed. And so then gaslighting me to take the medication that I didn't want to take. So it was in that journey where I was like, okay, I know that this is all learned behavior from all of the trauma. I have to unlearn this behavior. And that was where using holistic things like Reiki, crystals, yoga, meditation, in conjunction with life coaching. And then along the way, other modalities came along to be like tapping and sound healing and angel healing and all of those things.
I love it. It's honestly a similar story to what I've been through, and I haven't shared as much of my story, publicly, but
Yeah.
a lot of it resonates. And I think there's so much to unpack, right? And
Yeah.
I think the first thing to touch on is medication,
Yeah.
because a lot of people do feel pushed into it. A lot of people feel like you know, I think a lot of therapists will tell you medication. And when you say, like, it's not for me, they will kind of pull back and say, well, if you don't want to, then I can't help you.
Yes.
And that's so sad. That's
It
so
is.
sad. Being someone who's taken medications in my earlier life, especially far too young, it was draining. It was, sometimes agitating, sometimes sedating. And it is such a sad thing to go through, especially when you don't want to, when you're pushed into it, or it's, you're not fully informed of like the risks, because a lot of people aren't. Even people who are grown adults don't know everything that comes along with it.
Yes.
And something you do say on your podcast is people are allowed to take medication. Like, that's totally fine. It works for some people, and I agree. I think people who use it like it helps, then sure, take it for a while. I think the way I like to put it for my clients is it's like a training wheels, or like crutches. You can use a crutch if you have a broken leg, but eventually you have to walk without the crutch.
Yes.
Some people's legs never heal, and that's fine, but a lot of people do fear setting that down. Do you feel like you've had similar things come up in your clients' experience around medication and that struggle?
Yes. So I had one client who had an infant at the time when she was really struggling and went back to therapy, and she was nursing her baby. And the therapist said to her, well, you should probably stop nursing your baby so that you can take medication. And she said in that moment, she realized that she needed to do something else because she, A, wasn't ready to stop nursing her baby, but B, she shouldn't have to choose between medication and nursing her child.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so sad. That's so sad.
Yeah. I think too, it's, like you said, it's a crutch, but I think that a lot of times in therapy, it's so much, it's surface level. It's like, well, tell me about that time when. How did it make you feel when? And this is not bashing therapy. It's just because I know people who have been to therapy and who have had great results. The multiple times that I've been in therapy, I've not had great results. So I just know for myself, I need something other than therapy. But if therapy works, great. But I think that there are sometimes more powerful modalities, such as coaching, because in coaching, you get to the root cause of the problem. And so when you typically are doing traditional therapy, you're not really getting to the root cause of the problem. It's just like, tell me about that time when. Well, how did that make you feel then? And then what happened? And then what happened? And it's this constant repetition of the same story with really no resolution. And then strategies that are offered aren't necessarily strategies that are aligned with the current mindset. So they're not things like spray yourself with cooking spray, invisible, like, wow, okay, thanks so much for that one. And she would get really angry with me. She was like, I'm giving you tools for your invisible toolbox. I don't understand why you're not using them. And I was thinking to myself, I didn't want to be a jerk, but I'm thinking to myself, what tools have you given me for my invisible toolbox? Could you summarize them for me? Could you make an inventory list? Because I don't see any tools in this invisible toolbox aside from cooking spray and scissors that are both invisible. So it's like, so I think it's hard at times to determine what tools and strategies are really going to work for people. So it's just easier to say, we'll take this pill.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think that's honestly a lot of the medical system, not just therapy, where it's too hard to really get to the root of the problem. And I think there's a lot of things about the therapy system that are kind of built in that keep it from being as a similar modality to coaching.
Yes.
And I myself have had really good experiences with therapy, But after a long time and like coming out of my healing journey and seeing the other side, it was more about the therapy kind of drudged up the stuff that I hadn't addressed that was running subconscious. And then I would spend every day, self-help books, podcasts, just so much research. And I went to school for therapy for many years, and never got the degree because it didn't resonate. But,
Yeah.
I had to do all of the work, not even in therapy. That was just like pulling up some icky stuff, and then I was having to heal that. And eventually, that therapist just didn't resonate with me anymore. I was on the other side, and she was just like, "Oh, well, let's look at this thing that we healed 2 years ago." And I moved on to a life coach, and that was really transformational.
Yes.
What would you say are the biggest differences between therapy and coaching for anyone who just doesn't really know?
Yeah. So my interpretation is therapy is it's a lot of storytelling. It's a lot of labels and then getting stuck in those labels. And it's a big push to take medication to be able to get through the day. And if you are given strategies, it's like, okay, well, just journal about that. And it's like, okay, I can journal about it, but then what?
Mm-hmm.
So with life coaching, it's less about the stories, because the more you tell the story, it becomes more of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's also less about the labels, and it's more about identifying the patterns that you're running, which is really what the labels are. So it was like I was so stuck on the label of codependency, and it was like, no, I would say I am codependent, but it's like, no, you're not codependent. You're running a pattern of codependency. So that's the difference. When you have a label, it's attached to your identity. And then when you're running a pattern, it's something that you can change or alter so you don't have to continue running that pattern. So with coaching, it's really letting go of the labels and really figuring out what those patterns are, what those triggers are, what the meanings are that you make around those patterns and situations, and then recreating the meaning using mindset strategies that are aligned with where your mindset is currently in that moment. So the strategies are actually going to be something that you're going to use and not feel really awkward and uncomfortable with. So you'll continue using them until you can get to the next step of the journey to find a different strategy or tool that might be better at that point.
I think that's such a beautiful explanation. That really does cover it very well. I think therapy is often about like how do you feel, like what does that feel like to you, and coaching is more about how do you fix it. Like how do we take the stuff you pulled up in therapy and really problem solve. And some people don't want problem solving, and that's fine. But I think a lot of people out here are really needing that problem solving.
Yes. Like I've heard someone say like, "Oh, I've been in therapy for 14 years." Like that just makes me want to scream because I'm like, okay, if you are seeing a therapist for 14 years because you just want a sounding board and you just want to go talk to that person because you don't have another listening ear to turn to, okay. But I also think like for coaching, it's not a really great model because my whole goal as a coach is to get you to be independent from me so you don't need me for 14 years. Like I want you to be able to be independent and not rely on me to be able to get through the ups and downs of the day.
Absolutely. I something they joke about in college when you're talking about getting a degree in counseling is therapists work themselves out of a job, and that was kind of the joke, but it's honestly not really that way. It's not. Coaching is far more that way because therapy, yeah, it's not really problem solving, and it is kind of silly. We're working ourselves out of a job, but that's the fuel. That's the fuel to the fire. You get to help somebody, and then you get to move on and help somebody else. But if you're working with the same person for 14 years, you're not doing that much, obviously. Labels are such a thing, and I would love to talk about labels. You talk about this a lot, and I'm passionate about labels. Why don't you start us off? What is your insights about labels themselves?
Well, I think, labels are used to define things. And so I think sometimes labels can be really great. They can be empowering, like I am a softball player or I am an author. But I feel like the majority of the time that we're using labels, it's really in a negative light. So it's really about separating groups of people. It's about putting a label on yourself that keeps you stuck and stagnant in where you are. and can almost at times be like a crutch or an excuse not to take that next step forward. Or it allows you to justify rude behavior, bad behavior, selfish behavior, detrimental behavior to yourself and towards others. And so that's why I'm not a big fan of labels. I would rather say, okay, let's look for the pattern. Stop saying that about yourself, because two labels are also vehicles. So like, I start off like, oh, I'm a mom. That's a vehicle. That's one way I get my needs met. Like, I'm a wife. That's another vehicle. I'm a dog mom, a cat mom. That's another vehicle. So we use labels too sometimes as vehicles to get our needs met. But what we don't realize is that those labels, those vehicles are not guaranteed. They can be taken from us at any time, which is a morbid thought if you think about it. Because, like, I mean, God forbid, my daughter is going into high school. She could be out with a friend and get into a car accident and it not end well. My daughter could be swimming at the neighborhood pool with a friend and it not end well. So labels can be taken from us. They're not a guaranteed thing. So that's why I'm not always necessarily a huge fan of labels.
Yeah. I think labels can feel heavy a lot of times. And when they don't feel heavy, a lot of people will use them as a excuse, as a this is why. This is why all of these XYZ things that were awful. And that is a really awful place to be. I think as a person who has experienced having label after label after label, and it can be suffocating, it can feel heavy, and it seems kind of natural that a person would lean into the, well, this is so heavy and I can't escape it. It's who I am. So you have to do something with that, and blaming terrible behavior on it seems like a natural next step to being handed a label that's really heavy. I think something a lot of people don't really talk about is certain labels, certain things are first something that someone has to come to terms with and claim, certain ones. Maybe someone who had neglectful parents, or someone who experienced an angry parent. I was a child with an angry parent. And again, saying an abuse victim is a really heavy label, but some people feel like they were gaslit. Oftentimes people when they're young are gaslit into believing that their life is normal when it truly isn't, and it was awful. And so something I have to help my clients through a lot is take the label, if the one that feels right. Maybe it's not abuse victim, maybe it's not victim, maybe it's survivor, but take that label and hold it for a moment, embrace it, claim it, so you can hit that threshold and then release it. Because I'm all about, you can't release something until you've even noticed that it's yours, or was it at a time. So I think embracing the label so you can let it go is for some people sometimes an important step. But a lot of people, some people talk about labels being really not a great thing, and some people will skip the step of I have to let myself know that this is something. Is that something you see with your clients? Like the back and forth with those?
Yeah, and I think too, so I think a lot of times what happens with I see with my clients is the whole label, it immediately sends them into the victim space. Yeah. And then they stay there in the label of victim. So it doesn't matter if the label is codependency or anxiety or childhood and emotional neglect or abuse or whatever. Like my label now is survivor, because I've survived domestic violence, I've survived childhood trauma, and I am a survivor. But prior to doing the work, I was the victim. And it took my coach to say to me, Kim, you're not a victim anymore. How long are you going to carry the label of victim? And that was like a punch to the stomach, because I didn't even know I was still living in that label of victim. Because I had worked through and let go of the label of codependency. I had worked through and let go of the label anxiety. I had worked through and accepted that, yes, I did have emotionally neglectful parents as a child. And I even worked through and let go of the domestic violence with a high school boyfriend. But yet I still had the story of going of that I was a victim. So I was like, whoa, I didn't even see it coming. So I think that's a lot of times where people go. It's like they have I'll say the surface level labels, but they're inevitably go down to that deep label of victim, and they cannot shake it. It's the perpetual story of like, well, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why did I have to go through this? Why do people still treat me this way?
That's it. It's so hard to see someone fall into that heavy kind of pit of despair is what it feels like for a lot of people. And with people like that, I'm sure you have a similar explanation. I always explain that it's just a piece of information. It is nothing more than a word. Sure, like maybe you resonate with the concept of anxiety. Sure, maybe you can learn about that. Go ahead and do your research, do your whatever feels right. But you don't have to be anxious. You don't have to be an anxious person. You can just resonate with that as a concept, and you don't have to hold on to the label at all. Kind of reframing it, putting this perspective of this is just a word. It's just a word, a concept, an idea. It's not something that we can tangibly hold, and it's not nailed to your forehead. Just take that information and do what serves you with that.
Yeah. So I like to, I had a client who was so stuck on the anxious label. And I was like, and she would say all the time, I'm just so anxious. It's like, no, you're not. But that feeling, what is it that you're feeling? Notice that feeling, not the label. But when you feel that feeling, that's your little radar saying that something is off. So that gives you the opportunity to do a little bit of investigating to see what's off. So you don't need to hold on to the label of anxiety. You can just focus on what your body is telling you, reconnect with that feeling, and then move forward.
That's so true. So wise. I think we can take words like anxiety and think there's some far off big concept when really you're just feeling a busyness in your mind or a aching in your heart, whatever it is. And I think those labels can get in the way of really understanding what your body is asking for, because it's a need. All of those emotions are hungers for different things, and saying it's anxiety kind of disconnects you from that need and what actually solves it.
Yes. And so I think a lot of times too is that people turn to labels because it gives them a communication point, because we don't necessarily always have the words to explain what we're feeling, but we use common terms like that because everybody understands what anxiety is. Everybody understands what fear is. Everybody, those are basic terms that every human being has some experience with. So I think oftentimes it might not actually be anxiety. It might actually be fear, but they show up very similarly in our bodies. So we just automatically think that it's anxiety, and we just automatically give it that label because we haven't really stopped to think about and process exactly what it is that we're feeling, what's going on around us. But we just need to communicate it. So we just say the first thing that pops into our mind, and we use just these common words. But I think it's because we don't always have a way to communicate, because growing up, maybe we weren't encouraged to communicate things. And so this is just the easiest way for us to get it done. So to have someone to understand, like, help, I need help. But plus two, I think we are often so disconnected from our mind, body, and spirit that we stay in this surface level arena, and we don't allow ourselves to really stop and think about what is going on. We don't really stop to feel what is going on, and we're really not listening to what's going on in our heart to check, like to do that whole mind, body, spirit check-in with ourselves to be able to move forward in a more grounded and centered way.
True. And I think that's kind of hard work to do that check-in, especially when it's not your normal, when you've not made that an everyday practice. And then it kind of leaves you unsettled and confused, and like it's an unknown. You don't really know, and that is very scary for a lot of people to just say, I don't know what I'm feeling. It's not good, but I don't know. That is hard to sit with.
Yeah. And I think the other unsettling part is like, okay, maybe I figured it out, but now how do I cope with it? Now how do I get it to stop and, not stick with me for as long as it usually does?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Once you know what it is, that's just the first step. That is just the first step on a long journey, which can be intimidating for sure. And on that note of the journey itself, you've spoken about certain things kind of getting you to where you got to here. What were some of the things that didn't really work for you other than therapy? Were there certain modalities or books or things that just were not serving you?
Yeah, so I think the thing that didn't serve me, it wasn't necessarily specific books, but it was the fact that I was so hyper focused on all of the labels. So first it was codependency. I read all of Melody Beattie's books, Codependency No More. I did the workbook. She has another book, like a sequel to the Codependency No More. I'm drawing a blank on it at the moment. I did all of that, and I still have the binder up in my closet with like literally a whole pack of college ruled notebook paper worth of notes and reflection questions. And so that helps with the awareness piece, but it didn't help with the moving forward piece. So it was just this spiral where I was just like literally a hamster running in the wheel, or like, I don't know, when you're little and you have your bike with training wheels, sometimes if you could set your bike in just the right way, you could pedal as fast as your little legs would go and the wheel would spin, but you wouldn't move. It was very much that. And so it was a lot of self-help books. And there were a couple books that I read multiple times. One is Yellow. I'm only going to say that. And I, because most people I think will know which book it is. And after like reading it the fourth or fifth time, I was so much angrier and more frustrated than after I read it the first time, because I was reading this book like, where is the answer? Where is the answer? She's not telling me what I need to do. She's not giving me the answer so I can get out of this mess. But in the story, she talks about how she wanted a sports car, like a Ferrari or some nonsense. And so she went to the dealership and she had her picture taken in this sports car, and then she manifested getting one. And I was like, how is that even possible? Because I can't get out of my own way with a label of codependency. So, not realizing that some of the self-help books for today are not actually real self-help books. I'll say they're like pop culture self-help. So they're not going to give you that much bang for your buck. But the other thing too is like I binged podcasts and I was getting a lot of information, but I didn't have really any way to be accountable to move forward. Also, same thing with like YouTube videos. So I became obsessed with Tony Robbins, and I know he's a little bit controversial now for the way that he's treated women in the past, but I would listen to his YouTube videos driving in the car to take my kids to and from school. And then I was obsessed with Joel Osteen too, because I didn't really have religion in my life. And so I wanted to have like more of a spiritual connection. So in my mind, that was what you did. Like you went to church and you listened to Joel Osteen. And it got to the point where my kids were literally like, do we have to listen to God today? And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that you little peanuts were even listening to what was on the radio, because you have your little, Daniel Tiger video or whatever. So it's just like this constant like absorption. So it was like codependency books, then it was shame, and then it was, Brene Brown. It was like so many books that also became my whole personality of like self-help books and podcasts and YouTube videos and motivational speaker this and motivational speaker that. And I was learning so much, but I still didn't necessarily have the tools to be able to move forward. There wasn't accountability there, and I wasn't able to take the information that I was learning to say, oh, I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this, so I could keep moving along on the journey. So there were definitely places where I had a lot of stagnancy because I was just doing the same things over and over, but not really able to take action to move forward.
I resonate so much with that like cycle of like learn more, do more, learn more, fix myself, and it's so exhausting.
Yes.
The binders that, oh my gosh, speaking to my old self soul, it was almost at one point honestly an addiction. Like yes. I would go to therapy and dig up something I had never looked at before, and I'd cry and I'd be in my just hurting, and then I'd get off my little session and I'd come back home and I'd sit down and be like, wow, what a rush. I would feel good, and it was like, what am I doing? Like when I really realized that was the dopamine hit I was seeking, that was so unsettling. It shook me to my core, and that was probably the biggest push that took me into coaching rather than therapy. Realizing that that was an addiction at that point, and it is just spinning your wheels and going nowhere.
Yeah, and I too have the self-help book even now. As soon as we go into the local bookstore, my husband's like, "Are you going to go look at the books?" I'm like, "Nope, I'm not." And I won't. I will not allow myself to go over to that section because I'm like, I don't need another self-help book. Like, I've done the work. I have the tools and I know what to do if I'm, spiraling or stuck or triggered or whatever. I do not need another book. And so I will, if I go over, tell myself, like, you can browse, Kim, and you can take a picture of a cover of a book that you might want to add to a Christmas list or something, but you are not walking out of this bookstore with a book today. Not happening, sister.
I find myself still at the same place where it's like occasionally I'll want to peek into a little podcast and poke around, and probably 80% of the information I'm just frustrated with. Like, that's not what you should, don't teach people that. And it's so sad. And like, I don't like to get myself in those kind of moods where it's just like, occasionally you do find a little nugget of like, okay, that's a good perspective, but oftentimes it's, those of us who have been in that cycle, it's frustrating, I find, to find people kind of giving out the same old, tired, non-helpful information.
Yes, like if I hear one more person say, look in the mirror and say affirmations to yourself, ugh, you cannot say affirmations to yourself in looking at yourself in the mirror, because 9 times out of 10, you're not believing the affirmations that you're saying. So it's going to make you feel worse than if you don't say the affirmations at all.
I wanted to talk about that too. Way back in the day, a year or two ago, I had a podcast episode about affirmations that work for you, and finding where you are and push your comfort zone, just stretch it little by little until you can get to, I am a powerful, amazing, gifted person, when you start off feeling like, I don't even know if I'm worth the breath I breathe. I think I was probably 17 when I was told to look in the mirror and say, I am powerful, I am amazing. And that broke me. And it was kind of the same as the medication thing, where it's like, I'm not going to do that. And they were just push. And it was from 17 to 29, where it was like, I'm never going to say an affirmation in my life. And I use affirmations every single day now. I love them, and I think changing my language has been transformational, but I had to go from, I hate myself, to maybe I'm better than I think I am. Maybe, I underestimate myself. I think I'm a good person. I am, and just build yourself up slowly. And I think that's so important, because affirmations are great, but you can't go from step 1 to step 10.
Yes, and that's what a lot of people say is like I thought I was a failure. And so my therapist was like, look on Pinterest and find affirmations and inspirational quotes and create an inspiration board and hang it in your closet. And every morning go in and read all of those things. And I did that. And I was reading them. I just felt so like, yeah, for other people, this is fine, but like, this is not me. Like, I'm the failure because A, I'm in therapy, and I'm the failure because B, I couldn't hack it more than 6 years of my teaching career. And I'm the failure because I don't love being a stay-at-home mom. And I'm the failure because I get angry at my husband for working all the time. Like, so it was like, no matter even like the most benign affirmation, benign positive affirmation still did not feel like it was actually relevant to me, because the thought about myself was so dismal.
Absolutely. I think it was at 17, I, sitting there in the mirror trying to say those affirmations, I said to myself, if I have to sit here in the mirror and tell myself these things, obviously they're not true. And how devastating. How devastating. And that's just, it breaks my heart that people are out here still doing that. Still trying and feeling like, I'm just crazy for not even, why do I even have to do this? Obviously it's not true. And that's so heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why it's like, That's why I love the beauty of coaching it, because it's like, let's start where you are. Let's find
Yes.
something that's going to work for you right now in this moment, that's going to be able to get you from point A to maybe point A point, like A point two, instead of 8.0. Like,
Yes.
Meeting you where you're at. Meeting the
yes.
person where they're at. Yes.
So on the note of codependency, do you work with a lot of people who struggle with codependency?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think
you don't know it.
that's such a hard one. And I'm also a recovered codependent person. And dang, is that stigma heavy.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays when people talk about it, like we know what codependency is. When you have someone tell you like, well, I was told I might, and it's like, oh honey, like it's such a heavy stigma. How do you advise people on dealing with that weight of this is who they are, quote unquote.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like to try and do it in a way that says, like, explain to them that that was a learned behavior. That was a survival strategy, whether you were in childhood, adolescence, even adulthood. Like, that's a survival strategy. You're no longer in that situation, so you don't need to survive anymore. You can actually live outside of survival mode, even if you don't feel like you're thriving. You can live outside of survival. And so, really looking at helping them identify when the trigger of codependency happens. So, for instance, I had a client who's very codependent with her children, and she feels a lot of guilt because the father, her ex husband, was mentally and emotionally abusive to the kids and her as well. Put the second wife and the stepchildren usually in front of his children, yada yada yada. So she feels like she owes her children something for the way that their father behaved, because and granted, her children are in their mid-20s now, one of which is engaged, and she doesn't want to. She just feels like it's her fault, that they were in that situation. But I'm trying to get her to understand that, like, you actually are really strong and you actually did a lot for your children because you were brave enough to leave that relationship. You were the sole provider who put both of your kids through college. Like, your kids had everything they needed because of what you did for them. You cannot be codependent and basically undo what the relationship is with their father. Like, they have to do that work for themselves. You can't do that for them. And you being codependent isn't helping them move forward. So, like, just helping her really to identify when that pattern is coming up and why it's coming up and what she can do to nip it so that she doesn't continue to spiral.
Yeah, and it is right. It's a survival mechanism. It's how you get through, and it's sad, but it's kind of how a lot of negative behavioral patterns start. I would say most, and
Yeah.
so. And I don't work with a lot of mothers. That's not really my specialty. I've worked with a few, and just because I have a lot of the therapy knowledge plus all my own research. And something that you really touched on that I often lean into is nobody's perfect. Nobody makes it out of childhood without trauma, without a little bruises. And
Yes.
so the best thing you can do is show your children resiliency. Show them that you can look at hard things, you can be in a hard place, you can be really hard on yourself. You can be self-loathing, and then overcoming that, even if your kids have already picked up on those things, shows them that it's possible to heal. And
Yes.
that's a big part of your message, it seems like, which I just love. I just love that it is so compassionate to people.
Yeah. And actually, surprisingly, a lot of my clients are women who have already raised their children. So they're midlife women.
I love that. I think that's also a very underserved population. A lot of people don't talk about what it's like once your kids are out
living their lives.
Yes. And then when they come back to you, only when they need something.
Mm-hmm. How
And
heavy.
right. And that's, where this client is. It's like her one child literally had a boxed mattress shipped to her house and she barely could get it in the door. And he doesn't live far, so there was no reason that he couldn't have come over to get the mattress in the house for her, or better yet, just take it from her front step to his house where it needed to go. And he couldn't understand why she was irritated and frustrated by the situation. And then she felt like she had guilt about being angry and frustrated. So I was like, no, there's a boundary that needs to be put in place there. If he's going to have something shipped to your house, he needs to be there to retrieve it the day that it's delivered. And it will sit on the step until he comes to get it, because you are not the Amazon or UPS assistant who's trudging things into the house that probably weigh more than you. Not happening.
It's not your job. People get paid for that.
Right?
And don't even get me started on how many things mothers do that people get paid for.
Just right? So it's really just like, I want, really, with any pattern, whether it's codependency or anxiety or I don't even know, my whole goal is for people to see that, they've attached a meaning around themselves because of that, and that the meaning might have been true back then, but it doesn't mean that it's true now.
Yep.
And we can change the meaning.
Every day is the opportunity to change everything. And that can be scary. Change can be scary. And it's kind of, I like to reach into the little logic piece, because we can get really caught up in our emotions, and reaching in and saying, like, if you stay where you are versus change, where's the better option? What is the heavier, scarier option? And that's a difficult place to be, but
yeah, it's easier for people to stay where they are because that's familiar. Even if it doesn't feel good and it's not helpful, at least it's familiar, so they know what to expect. When they go to, uncharted territory, on the other side of that situation, they've typically not been there before. So it's like, oh, I don't know about this. It's kind of like, when people were emigrating to America from Europe, they were hopping on a boat. They literally had no idea where they were going. They'd never been there before. They didn't know anyone there. So there wasn't even anyone that could send information back to be like, okay, this is great. No worries, safe. You're really going to like it here. It was just like taking that blind leap. And so I think that's often what it feels like to get on the other side of it. And the blind leap is scary. So most people are like, no, thanks. Well, I'm not really good like this. I think I'm better than a blind leap.
Yeah. That first piece about weighing which is scarier, that's my first approach. The thing that really changed everything for me, that got me, out of a awful job that was draining, and out of a toxic family system, and out of living in my own ick, was, if I don't do this thing, whatever this thing is. I mean, my podcast was this. If I don't do this thing, in a week from now, am I going to look back and say, should I have? In a month from now, am I going to look back and wish I had? In a year from now, if I'm going to be thinking of this in 6 months, wishing or thinking, what if that what if for me had always been a terrifying thing? What if? You think about, what if I had lived my life different and now I'm here? So framing it that way for myself was how I got, to everything I am now. What if I don't do that? That's a big, scary what if. And so it's kind of that risk. Like, do you want to take the risk? And that's such I've not heard people talk much about what if you don't. Do you have any experiences with, like, doing something because you were afraid of the what if you didn't, in a good way?
Yeah, this, like, my whole healing journey, because I was in such a desperate, dark place that, because I had 2 little girls, I did not want them to grow up to be like me in the place that I was in that moment. And so I was like, this cannot continue. I will do whatever it takes so that my girls don't grow up to be this. So like I knew I had to break the cycle of the generational trauma. My kids don't really have childhood trauma. I'll say they're coming out with very minimal bruises, but I just didn't want my dysfunctional behavior to impact them the way that I had adults with dysfunctional behavior impacting me. So I was like, that right there was enough for me to be like, I don't care what this is going to take. I don't care how bad this is going to feel, but we cannot be having this any longer.
Absolutely. And I think just on the note of children and how they do really adapt, we know, scientifically, psychology-wise, that the biggest indicator of like the wellness of a person who's been through trauma is the support system and the people around them. And we think of like ourselves, for example, of like, I had a rough childhood, but I had no one to turn to, and that really hurts a lot of people and carries through with them. But on your healing journey, the more people you can incorporate, the more support. People always ask about support systems in psychology. And like, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you have people to go to, even if they don't have a solution. I mean, it's great if you have a coach or somebody who can give you, solutions, but just someone to say like, this sucks, and for them to look at you and say, yeah, that sucks. Like that is so pivotal, and the earlier the better, So honestly, to anybody who has children that have had bruises,
yes.
it is possible. It is so possible with just the right environment and some support.
Yeah. The other thing too that I was glad that I did, it was like kind of that what if moment was because things felt so tumultuous with leaving my teaching career and trying to be a stay-at-home, all those things. And I really wanted everything to, I'll say, be so not picture perfect, but I wanted the emotion to be consistently happy all the time. Like I did not want any crying. I did not, from me, from my kids, I did not want any arguing with them. I did not want any fighting with my husband. I did not want any frustration from me. Like I just wanted everyone to be like in this little utopian bubble where we all walk around with our little smiles on our faces and we're all just like, like getting along and everything is hunky-dory and we're singing Kumbaya, holding hands. But I realized that I had to let that go too, because that was just as bad as having crazy dysfunction, because then I wasn't allowing people to be human and feel feelings and have thoughts and a sense of autonomy. And it also wasn't teaching them the resiliency that you mentioned earlier. We can't have like this static flat line of life. So I always say like, I'm happy with riding the kiddie coaster with like the little ups and downs, and I can still feel the breeze blowing in my hair, but I just don't want the adult coaster that's got huge dips, huge inclines, loops, and forwards and backwards and all those things. Like kiddie coaster is great. So we are still feeling things. We're still, having a sense of autonomy. We're still having experiences. We're having challenges and obstacles, but nothing that's so catastrophic that we can't pick ourselves back up from them.
Absolutely. And that often that adult roller coaster is where we start, and it can transition into a kiddie coaster. Sometimes there's a bigger peak or a bigger dip, but it does even out for sure. You kind of learn how to shape that coaster through your life for sure.
Yeah, well, I didn't want any coaster ride. I just wanted like a flat country road, like I-95, like a big interstate that's always like generally flat for hundreds of miles. That's what I wanted. Just one long flat road, nothing else.
And I think that's something a lot of people desire when they've had nothing but the most chaotic coaster their entire lives. It's like the grass is always greener thing, but
yes.
it isn't a realistic thing, but it isn't even very human. As humans, we've got to go through those dips. We've got to have a little wind in our hair for sure.
Yes, and that honestly, trying to keep everyone just so was more exhausting than the ups and the downs.
True. I can see that for sure in my own life.
So I had to, in addition to like looking on the other side of the what if, I had to also change my perspective of what the other side should look like.
Yes. Yes, that's also very important. And it takes time to get there, but I think everybody finds their own version of what that side should look like. And once they have their sights set and it's realistic and it resonates with them, that's where people end up. That's where people end up. So something you mentioned a few times in your podcast is about living in the present moment and how it's very important. And I love this topic. I would love for you to give like a little snippet about the importance of living in the present.
Yeah, so early in my healing journey, I was so not in the present moment because I was looking for the next book, the next podcast, the next YouTube video, and I missed out on what was happening right in front of my face. So now sometimes I look back at pictures of like family vacation or when my girls were little, and I get a little emotional because I'm like, oh, I didn't really like live fully in that moment. So like there were times when the girls, were like, come play with us, and I was like, no, you girls play. I have to do this. But I didn't really have to do that. I chose to read the book, or I chose to clean the dishes in the sink instead of just being like, screw it, the dishes can wait until later. Yep, here I come, girls. And so it's like we can be so, and this is kind of where the anxiety comes in, we can be so fixated on what happened in the past or what we think might happen in the future that we spend so much time worrying about those things and reflecting or projecting that we're really missing what's here in this moment. And then we are often filled with regret because we realize after the fact that we missed something big and didn't take the time to enjoy it.
And it is a heartbreaking thing. It's heartbreaking because the present is really only here for a moment. And then you can't change it. I think if we'll lean into the labels for the sake of understanding, I think something that, I actually was just telling my clients this yesterday, with living in the future, like just focusing completely on the future, that is similar to the energy of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And living in the past is similar to the energy of depression.
Yes.
And if you focus too much and you spiral down that direction, you can end up feeling that way. And it's really hard to kind of swallow that pill, but if you're too focused on the past or the future, you get really stuck in places that you don't want to be.
Yes, absolutely. And I think part of it goes back to survival. When we've been in traumatic or dysfunctional situations, we've had to stay stuck in the past and the future at the same time. Stuck in the past because we've had to, analyze what happened so that way we can make sure it doesn't happen in the future. But then we're hyper vigilant about what the future looks like or feels like or sounds like, so that way we don't repeat what happened in the past, so that we can be prepared to roll with the punches in whatever way that needs to look like in that moment, because it also can change from time to time. And being able to pull things out of our toolboxes, like, oh, yep, I got this, I can do this, and then so we don't have more trauma or dysfunction or minimize what is coming down the road. And so it's just become so natural, really like a huge habit. So like oftentimes I say, like, when we're born, we have our core identity, and that's who we are as a person. But then we have, experiences and people and thoughts and things happen, and then we shift and we're no longer in our core identity. And I'm drawing a blank on my mind for when we're in our shifted identity. It's not important, but we shift. So we're out of alignment. And so having that need to, like, we're not in the present moment because we're not in alignment with who we really are as our core. It's because we've had so many things put onto us that we're sort of just like playing whack-a-mole almost to just stay afloat.
Yes, and for children especially who are living in chaotic and sometimes dangerous environments, there is always the question of, like, what did I do wrong? Like, that's just what children always blame themselves. They're innocent little people and they just don't know any better. And I think with an outburst from a parent, it's, oh no, what did I do wrong and what can I do better? So you're looking at the past, what did I do wrong, and looking at the future, what can I do better? And it is survival, and sometimes literally, and that's so sad. And I think people who do survive get really stuck in those patterns, like you said, and it's hard, but I like the idea of realigning to your true identity, because that is what it's all about.
Yeah, and so I remember it's operational. So core and operational. So operational is where you've shifted out of that core alignment. And it sounds so like maybe a touch superficial, like, oh, okay, yeah, who like core identity, like I don't even know who I am at my core. Like, it takes work to rediscover that. But I think once you get back into alignment with who you are, what your values truly are, uh, you know, what you really believe in, I think it's easier to step out of those survival mode situations and come back to the present moment, because you have more boundaries in place. You have that awareness. You can say, okay, this really doesn't matter right now. It's not going to matter in 1 day, 1 week, 5 weeks, 5 years. So it's okay to let it go for right now, so I can focus on what's going on here in this moment.
I love that. And I think another important thing to remember is we get to create who we are.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know who your core self is, you can choose. Like, it's not an easy process, but you can choose who you want to be. People change who they are every day.
Yes. And just giving yourself the space to discover who that is.
Mm-hmm.
And being okay with if you try something and it doesn't really feel quite right, to be like, okay, I tried that. That's not really my jam. So let me try something else. And having to try something else doesn't mean failure. It just means not a good fit. And there's a difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's the difference between failure and learning something is really just the value you assign it. If you tell yourself it's a failure, then that's what it's going to feel like. But if you say, okay, well, I learned that that's not who I am and not what I want to do, and you learn something, and you can take that knowledge and move forward with compassion.
Yeah. And that's huge. Like that right there is a win in that experience, is that you've learned something.
Yes, absolutely. So I would love to just ask about what kind of specialties you work with. What clients, we talked about it a little bit, but there are certain behavioral patterns or things that you really hone in on in your coaching?
For me, I feel like I don't want to say generalized trauma, because that sounds like pretty vague, but it really is someone who has had childhood trauma, which has then impacted an intimate relationship, whether it's been a boyfriend or a husband, and then which is then impacting their immediate family environment and also their work existence. So I've had it, so it's like the childhood trauma, and then it's affecting the marriage, but it's also affecting the relationship with the in-laws. Or the childhood trauma affected the way that they parented their kids and their marriage. They overcame that, but now it's showing back up in work life. And there's also usually been some sort of substance abuse in their own direct line, or in some other familial aspect that's impacted them.
What a heavy situation. It's like lifelong.
Yeah.
And that's such a big task to do as a coach. And I think it's so beautiful that you're just out here doing it. Like, I mean, people are out here doing this every day. It's an important thing to do. What kind of modalities do you really help your clients with? Like, teach them or use with them?
Yeah, so it's funny. I have sort of two schools. I have the clients who are like all about the woo, like woo me up, Reiki me, let's tap, let's use crystals, like give me that stuff. And then I have other clients who are like, oh, you are not coming anywhere near me with that woo stuff. You can coach me, but don't Reiki me. Don't even send it to me. I don't want to hear the word crystal. Like, absolutely not. You will life coach. No, we're not even tapping. We'll talk. And that's it. So it's funny. That's like very distinct. And I'm always like, the people who are so resistant to it, I'm like, yeah, but you're missing out on something so amazingly beautiful that's going to just amplify your, no. I'm like, okay, whoa, slow going. So I have a client who is funny. She is so not woo. An older Southern woman, just polar opposite of woo. And she saw me do a card pull on Facebook once, and she was just having me tuning in. She was like, thought the cards were beautiful, And she was like, you pulled that card just for me. I really felt like that. And she was like, I have to look into these cards a little bit more. So she was like willing for about 2.6 seconds to entertain the idea of cards and using them to get her through. And then I said, I'm going to send you a deck. She's like, no, that's okay. You don't need to send me a deck. And then that was it. She had moved on.
I love that. It is funny how you have the people who are like, I don't want nothing but woo, and then you have the people who are absolutely no, absolutely no. Does it feel like there's a lot of crossover, even so, with kind of the two different sides of it?
Yeah, so it's easier for me to do the crossover with the people who are more woo. So I have a client now who's getting ready to go into her second tapping package, and she really needs coaching more than she needs the tapping because there are some, but in her mind, she's like, oh, I've worked with a coach before, but we've chatted about it, and I don't know the coach. But from what she said to me, I'm like, no, that wasn't an effective coach because you did not do any deep stuff. You stayed surface level. It was kind of like your basic surface level affirmation kind of coach. And so in her mind, she's like, oh no, I've already coached. And so I said to her for this next round, I'm like, are we coaching or are we tapping? She was like, I said, or could we do a little bit of both? And she's like, yeah, we can do tapping with just a little bit of coaching. So I feel like I'm slowly getting her to be more open. But for the most part, it's easier for me to get the woo people to be more interested in like doing some deep level work with coaching. But the people who are strictly coaching, they're not yet. How about you? Is it the same for you?
I honestly, I'm so woo. I hardly work with anybody who's not woo. But it is always the people who are just a little bit end up completely woo. It's just kind of my energy. I just work that way, and so I do see the difference. Though I have people who aren't actually clients, but friends and acquaintances who are just very aware of what I do and just wary of it, but they appreciate the wisdom, but are not receptive to the woo, and that's fine. That's
Yes.
you know, everybody has their own specific thing.
Yes.
So you mentioned tapping. I'm such a fan of tapping. Oh my gosh,
I love it.
I love it. I'm not certified or anything, but I use it for myself, and I do really appreciate tapping. And you do Reiki.
Mm-hmm.
And then what was that other one you mentioned? The angel healing.
Yeah.
Can
So
I
I'm
that?
so I'm the modality girl. It's like, oh, I use that. Let me get certified in that. And so I'm like, the last modality I think I'm going to do is my yoga teacher training. But then it's funny because I'm like, oh, I think universe has a different, like another thing too, because I've had two people recently say to me like, oh, you do nutritional coaching too, right? And I'm like, nope, not a nutritional coach, but I've had two people in the last month say, do you do nutrition? So maybe I'll do nutrition coaching too. I don't know. We'll see. But for right now, the woo stuff is like more the focus. So I do Reiki, and then I do the tapping. I also do sound healing, and then I do IET, which is integrative energy therapy. And so that's basically angel healing. So it's hands-on healing, just like you would do Reiki, but the integration points are different, and you basically call on the power of the angels.
I love that. I love that. Are they the traditional like archangel, kind of seven rays team?
Yeah, so there are actually, I think, 12 angels, if I'm remembering correctly. But there's Cassiel, there's Ariel, there's Gabriel, there's Michael, there's Sarah. So there are some of like the traditional like archangels, and then there are a few others as well.
I love that. I'm so fascinated in all the modalities. Goodness gracious. I'm kind of a collector of modalities and little knowledge pieces. Super interesting. Where did you learn about that? Where was your teaching on that?
So my coach friend who we're friends, but then she would also do sound healing for me. She would a couple times she was like, I'm being called to do angel healing for you. And I was like, okay, I'll take some angel healing. Sure. Like sign me up. And so then I realized that she was also certified to teach it through the integrative energy therapy association. And so I was like, ooh, yes, please. So I did level 1, and then she was like, oh, there's a 2 and a 3, and then you can become a master instructor. And I was like, you don't say. So then I did 2 and I did 3, and then I just did my master instructor level in June. So
I love that. How fun. How fun. It's funny how those things kind of come to us. They just get dropped. The ones that are meant for us, they get dropped right in our laps.
yes. So, but it's like, I can't just have one level. I'm like, if there are 4 levels, then I have to have all 4.
I feel the same way about a lot of things, goodness. But it's kind of that eldest daughter syndrome, that trendy thing people talk about. It's kind of that energy, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's fun. If you can make it healthy, it's fun. It's fun.
Yes. So, and that's why I'm like, before I was just like, oh, yes, 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 like the little kid in the candy shop. And now I'm like, okay, you need to slow down, and you need to actually check in with your gut. And does this feel like a heck yes or a heck no? Because if it's not a heck yes, we're not doing it right now. You have to wait until it feels like a heck yes. So if it's not that right now, you can't say yes. You have to wait.
I love that. It is that inner child, inner teenager, whoever was the one affected, for sure. And so something I'm so interested to ask you about is on your podcast. Your little thing is to read entries from your old journals, which
Yes.
love that. I'm
Thanks.
obsessed. That's great. And I know that, especially in the past when I was starting the healing journey or kind of halfway through, that was kind of a painful thing to do for me. To go back and look at the heavy things that my old self wrote. And I often found myself grieving for that old me. And, you know, it was only just the past 6 months or so that I was able to go back and just be joyful at how far I've come.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's beautiful that you've been able to share that with the world. Do you ever experience that little bit of grief?
Yes. So in full transparency, I started reading my journal entries. My first journal was actually a 3-ring binder, and that was like November of 2014 when I started therapy. I don't remember. I think my first maybe journal entry that I read on the air was probably from early 2016, late 2015. But when I filled up that first 3-ring binder, that was probably some of the darkest entries I had. And when I went back and looked at them, I was mortified. I actually ripped them all up and put them in recycling because I was like, this is more of a thought, but I was like, if I die and my husband has to clean out my things, like, I don't want him to find these journal entries, because I had written in there that I didn't think that our marriage was going to last. I didn't think that he loved me. It just was really not a great time. And so I was just, I couldn't believe I wrote some dark, deep stuff like that and didn't want anyone else to find it. So I ripped those up and threw them away. But then when I started my podcast, I was like, darn, I wish I hadn't done that, because this is exactly what people need to hear. So the journal entries I share online, I will say, are not muted, but I'll say they're a little less dark. But there have been some of them where I read and I was like, ooh, that does not feel nice. And that's really actually kind of sad or pathetic or disappointing. But then it gives, like you said, it's a celebration of how far I've come. So like, yes, in that moment, I feel really bad for myself. I feel bad for my husband that he had to deal with me going through that, because it was not a cakewalk for him either. But then also for my kids, because I wasn't the most available for them when they were little, because I was trying to get my own self together. So sometimes it really does like trudge up sad, awful feelings, but I'm able to either just tap on it or Reiki myself, and I just kind of release the energy and let it go, and I'm okay. But yes, there are a few entries where I was like, ow, that doesn't really feel so nice.
Yeah, I'm kind of a fixer, you know, in my own personal to myself. I'm a fixer. And my solution has has now been to literally leaning into the woo. Time is kind of irrelevant. It's not really, it's kind of an illusion. So I will send energy healing to that past me.
Yeah.
Because maybe if you want to lean into it, that's part of how I got here, right? And so I heal myself by healing that past hurt and just sending her love, sending her compassion, and like sometimes even visualizing in a meditation, like sitting down like you would with an inner child, just that me, and really giving her love. And it's so beautiful when you can come to that place, because it is really hard to kind of really dip right back into the mindset of when you were at your lowest. And it's a heavy thing to face, but I think it's so beautiful that you are doing that just for everybody to really share in that healing.
Oh, thank you. And I really did it because I felt so alone in the journey. Mostly, I didn't want anyone to find out because I really felt like I was really effed up in the head. I did not want anybody to even remotely have any idea about that because that's super embarrassing, first and foremost. But then also, embarrassing, yes. But also, it's like, I didn't want anyone to think badly about me. So I didn't want them to judge me or think less of me. So I really kept the whole struggle kept it close to my chest. But then I feel like I struggled so much more in that moment because I really wasn't willing to be vulnerable and let anybody in. And I probably actually made myself suffer more than was necessary by being so closed off to having people know that I was struggling. So I was like, well, I can't go back and change it in that moment, but I can share it now. So if it gives someone um, the solace or the comfort that they need, then it's worth it now.
Absolutely. And I love that sentiment. As we started this podcast off doing, I think we end up trying to do for people what we didn't have. And I think it's really beautiful when we can do that in a way that serves us as well as others.
Yeah. So, and partly too, it's like on some level that allows me to be seen and heard, which hasn't always happened. And even going through the journey, like my husband, his upbringing was so vastly different from mine. Like his parents are still married for over 60 years. They, like I jokingly say, if anyone had a white picket fence in their front yard, it was him. Like no dysfunction in their family. I shouldn't say no dysfunction, but like no trauma. So he's the youngest of three boys. They're like your typical all-American family. I will say probably a little bit of dysfunction because like he doesn't ever remember his parents arguing with each other in front of him and his brothers, which is not healthy. Like you have to teach, like it's okay to argue because it shows and models how to navigate conflict and make up and come to a solution and all of those things. So early in our relationship, probably until like just a few years ago, it was really, communication was really a huge struggle because I grew up seeing parents going at it, like hardcore knockdown, drag out, going at it. He didn't see anybody getting even slightly irritated with each other. So I was like the pit bull going for the throat, and he was like the little dog on his back, peeing all over, like, please don't murder me. So, you know, it was just going through that journey. Like he didn't even always know what to do to help me. I didn't even know what to do to help myself. And that was one of the episodes that I talked about, is like, he was like, I don't even know what to do to help you, but you don't even know. So how can you expect me to know? And I was like, huh, he's right. I don't even know. So it's like, it's almost like it gives a voice to the situation then that I didn't necessarily have in the moment.
Yeah. And I think that's so beautiful, touching on the fact that it's healthy for healthy conflict. Goodness, I was raised in a home where I never saw my parents argue, not a single time.
Really?
But it was always tension. It was, as soon as Dad walks in the room, everybody gets real quiet. Mom shuts down. We all see it. We all feel it. You know, being a very sensitive to energies kind of person, you know, but there's no talking about it. There's no communication. It's just this constant level of anxiety of like, what's going to happen next? And I think that's another thing that people maybe not literally out loud get gaslit, but it's like, well, there was no fighting. No one got hit, so there's no trauma there. And that's
right.
Not always the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and then that was the thing too. Like, so at my dad's house, there really wasn't any arguing, but there was some nagging. And so I think my dad did not want to repeat what happened in his marriage to my mom, that he kind of just, you know, didn't really push back against my stepmom. But in my mom's house, there was a lot of dysfunction. There was a lot of trauma and fighting. But before it exploded and erupted into the big screaming match, there was that tension. And you just did not know when it was going to come to a head and explode. So it's like, it's interesting to see how there are two different dynamics, one where there's no arguing and you still feel the tension, and one where there's tension that leads to the eruption. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's so dysregulating to a small child to have to live, not just be in, but live in an environment like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's no escaping it. It's not like you can be like, okay, it's time to go. I'm going back to my own house. I'll see you guys later.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Done.
I think some of my friends probably experience this. I've heard, as an adult, some of my friends I have now talk about you go to that one friend's house and you can just tell everybody's off. You can just tell it's not a happy home, and you feel awful. That person feels very unsettled and very unsafe, and then they get to go home and rest. And I like to frame it to people that way when they don't really know. Like, I don't understand what it's like. How explain to me what it's like to grow up like that, and then I have to like frame it. You know that one friend, everybody's family was really sketchy. And, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and immediately everybody knows because there's always one friend with that family.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that what I had to learn in my journey was that when I mentioned that, my husband was like, I don't know what to do for you because you don't even know what to do for yourself. I so desperately with therapy, with the self-help books, the podcasts, the YouTube videos, the whatever, I wanted someone to say like, you're right, Kim, this is so screwed up. You are a train wreck. You are a mess. And here's how you're going to fix it. And so there was no one there saying like, it just didn't exist. And so I so desperately wanted someone to fix me. And I wanted them to tell me that I mattered. I wanted them to make me feel safe. I wanted them to, but yet variety, because like I didn't want to live a Groundhog Day life. And I wanted to feel love and connection. And so it was like this very grasping, needy energy that I had. Like there were a few friends that I had who knew that they knew that I was struggling. And so like I could confide in them a little bit. And I wanted them to be like, wow, Kim, that really sucks that you have to go to therapy this week. But they didn't really know what to say either. So they're like, oh, that's awful. And then would like quickly change the conversation because no one wants to be around a Debbie Downer that just wants to complain about her problems all the time. But I wanted someone to listen to me, darn it. And so I had to realize I had to start doing that for myself. So I had to give myself the variety that I was looking for. So that meant I had to learn how to like myself. I had to learn how to love myself. So I had to learn how to take myself on little dates, like go shopping with myself, which was awkward AF because I didn't like shopping is still not my jam. I've gotten better now having young daughters my sister-in-law taught them how to shop. So they're in turn teaching me. But I didn't, because growing up, clothing wasn't a fashion thing. It was a functional thing. So I didn't have like jewelry and like the latest sneakers. I just got like the $29.99 Nikes.
Yeah.
Like on the clearance rack. I just got my clothes from JCPenney's on the clearance rack. And there was one shirt that was actually not on the clearance rack and I loved it. It was cute. It was like, in the 90s. So it was like a little baby doll tee. It was like blue with smiling clouds all over. And I was so excited to wear it to school the next day. And then the girl who bullied me was like, my mom has that shirt. Like, that's the stupidest shirt ever. And I was like, oh, the one time where I thought I was actually getting to get clothes for fashion. It didn't work. So I had to take myself shopping and go on little shopping dates and be willing to go into the dressing room and try things on. And even though it felt really scary and uncomfortable, but it felt exciting at the same time. And I had to be able to figure out ways to make myself feel safe. And that was where I created my morning ritual. So like I started the day with meditation. I started the day with journaling. I have Melody Beattie's book. I still read it every day. It's like basically like affirmation, meditation type things for the soul. And so like that created safety for me because I knew I could do that every morning and start my day off with a feeling of being grounded. If things got a little wonky during the day, I could say to the girls like, okay, you're going to sit here and watch the iPad for 5 minutes. I'm going into the dining room. You can't come in. And I would go in and meditate. So like I was learning how to do things to give myself that feeling of comfort and safety that I needed. But then I also was learning that I actually did matter. So like it was okay that I had thoughts and feelings and could communicate them, even if it wasn't always well received. So like sometimes I would bring things up to my husband and he felt like I was attacking him or lashing out at him, and he would get a little bit defensive. So then like he had to learn that it's okay for me to say these things, even if it doesn't feel nice towards him. It's not necessarily me directed towards him personally. It's just like what I'm noticing, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. And he had to learn how to be receptive to that feedback. And I also had to learn how to be receptive to his feedback too. So like that was also a learning curve for both of us. But I had to learn, to learn that I actually was like, I am worthy, I am lovable. And that was where a lot of the holistic stuff came in, Reiki, meditation, yoga, like just being on my mat, doing chakra work, that helps with that piece. But then also knowing that I did have love for my husband, even if it didn't already always feel that way. Most of it was the story I was telling myself, but I was connected because, I felt alone and isolated a lot in my journey. But I had friends. Like I would go to my girls' parties at school and chat with the other parents, even if it was superficial. There were many ways that I was connected. So I had to then take it to the next step and realize that I also wanted to do things that were going to allow me to grow as a person and contribute not just to my family, but to others as well. When I got all of those pieces, then I really knew that I was able to validate myself internally. And I felt like I didn't need to go grasping around externally because I could do it for myself at that point.
And that's exactly the energy of what they would call codependency, of like
Right.
needing it from others. And I think, obviously that breeds from never getting that when you're a kid. And then you finally get it and it's like a drug. You just need it. And like, man, it's a lot. But I think once you learn to love yourself, it's kind of like you love people in a way you didn't even know you could.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful place to reach. And also like totally possible. Like totally possible to love somebody and allow that, not get dependent on it, not over attached, but allow that to help you to learn to love yourself. I think it's such an awful, toxic phrase that people say with the, you can't love others until you love yourself. That's so awful. And like maybe you can't love them to the same extent. But I think people who are really, really in the depths, hearing that, like all they have are those other people. They don't care about themselves, and like, man, how heartbreaking. How heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you actually can love other people even if you don't love yourself in the moment, because I think those, when you love other people, it's almost like it's giving you that external validation. It shows you that someone is willing to let you in to love them. So if someone's willing to let you in, then that means you are lovable. So it's like almost like it feeds the soul too, as long as it's not in a codependent or unhealthy way.
Right. Right. It very easily gets very unbalanced and becomes codependent. But I think it can be a stepping stone, a little bump up to learning to love yourself. And it's finding the compassion there, which is hard when you're in those spaces, but finding the compassion to like, okay, I don't love myself in this moment right now, but other people do. So obviously I'm worth it to someone, so why can't I be worth it to myself? And obviously very simplified, but
too, it's like your aunt, like this sounds bizarre, but like there were times where I was like, well, Franklin loves me, so I must not be that bad. Like if the dog loves me and he's a rescue, and Winnie, our other dog, is also a rescue, and she's had a much more horrific life than Franklin, but like if Winnie loves me and she sees the value in me, and maybe it's just because I put kibble in her bowl every day, but like she sees some value in me, I can't be that bad of a person, because animals are very aware. So like, if you're a not nice person, they're not going to want anything to do with you. So, because they have such a very good filter of character. So I'm like, if they like me and they see who I am truly, like my character on a soul level, then that's like, that must mean there's something good there. So like it sometimes it was like that low. I was like, it's not other people. Like I just need the dogs to tell me that I'm an okay person.
I so agree. I have had the same experience. We have a dog who, when he was younger, he would have the one friend who's awful, or the sister's boyfriend's cousin who's awful, who would show up and he would hide or like urinate on the floor. And it's like, this guy loves me. Like, he's obsessed with me. What does that mean? And it gets your mind kind of turning because animals are so connected. And I also think that was really healing for me when I went and was doing work at like shelters and like with just sitting with the cats and like walking the dogs. And they're terrified of like everyone. But then that one cat is just like buds with you and it's like, okay. Like maybe there's something.
Yes. So it's like, it gives that glimmer of hope, as silly as that sounds. And so like, but sometimes you just need that one glimmer of hope to know.
Yeah. And I think anybody who's been in the space of hopelessness, it really, any kind of hope is hope. Any kind of hope.
Yes.
I spent 2 years working at the suicide hotline. And it's one of the things you say every single day is it doesn't matter why you choose to continue going as long as you choose. So like, let's look. Do you have a pet? Do you have a project you want to do? Do you have a friend who told you you're going to go to coffee tomorrow? Like, whatever it is, and again, it's the compassion. It's not judging yourself and just saying like, okay, this is enough for now. It's the first step toward the person you're wanting to be.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, so that's the goal too, is that I really try to get my clients to work for that internal validation rather than seeking that external all the time.
Absolutely. It's essential. And I think as coaches, that's one of the things we do a lot is okay, I'll tell you you're good enough. But eventually you have to take that yourself and you have to be able to, it's kind of the energy of, I'll show you the path, but I'm not going to hold your hand and drag you the whole way. Whereas
That's right.
Therapy is going to put you in a cart and lug you down that path.
Even if you're kicking and screaming.
Yeah. You may not get anywhere, but they're going to make you.
Yes.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming. I would love for you to share where everybody can find you and how they can get a hold of you if they'd like to.
Oh yeah. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube. All of my handles are at Kim V Keane. So V as in Victoria. But my website is kimkeane.com. You can always shoot me an email there or message me on any of the social media platforms.
Thank you so much. It was nice talking to you. I love to connect, and we will see you soon.
Yes, and I can't wait to have you on my podcast as well.
I cannot wait. Oh my gosh.
Thank you so much for watching to the end of this episode. I hope that you found some healing in this interview that you can take for yourself. I will be appearing on Kim's podcast, One of a Kind You, so I'll be posting an update when that goes live. Remember to follow my channel to see more of this kind of content, and if you're interested in my Patreon community, coaching, or my oil blend, everything you need will be down in the description. Remember, be well, be kind, and may your curiosity for this world and the next never fade.